Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Great to be back with you again. You'll notice we've got a slightly different crew this week. Phil is travelling. Lloyd has a domestic matter. But we've fortunately got Greg coming in here, who is one of the Liberate Scotland prospective parliamentary candidates for Wishaw, to give us his pearls of wisdom, folks. This is the type of person that you can elect come May, and hope you will do. So it's been a really busy week, so let's get started right away. And there's quite a lot of things, you would normally think global, but they affect us. And one of them was, as you're probably all aware out there, the Americans, pirates, seized illegally a tanker, with the Venezuelan oil, stole the oil, and then parked the boat in the Moray Firth, and then protected it with an American Coastguard. Not even one of the Royal Navy, but a Coastguard. So it just shows how we are a colony. We have no say in our own land, what boats, what anything can sit in our waters. We're by association pirates now. We've broken international law by association. And here's what John Swinney, is he angry? Decide for yourselves.
I would have expected to have been briefed in advance. About steps to accommodate the tanker in the Moray Firth. I'm deeply concerned that I have not been, and these issues have been raised with the United Kingdom government, and we're trying to seek information about this. It is not appropriate for the Scottish Government to learn about these issues through media reports. There should be advance briefing from the United Kingdom government, and I'm insisting upon that. But this is an example of an area where I think we should have a knowledge and an awareness of the movements of such vessels in such circumstances, because there can, of course, be implications for Scotland as a consequence.
And as I said there in my opening remarks, an act of piracy, now by association, we've been tarred with that brush. And John Swinney, I'm a wee bit upset, and I've made representations to the UK government. This should be the catalyst. This should be an absolute catalyst for going for independence. If ever we needed it, we are being associated because of London's slavish devotion to America. Speaking, Alan.
Sorry, you were breaking up there just on my computer. Yeah, I mean, this action should be angering every single Scot, because it is showing how much of a colony Scotland is. The United States of America instigated an act of piracy on a Russian oil vessel in Scottish waters. They are now holding that vessel in a Scottish port, a free port, I have to add, but illegally in Scottish waters. And not only that, they have an armed battle boat in that area. The American Coastguard is a part of the American Army. It is under Homeland Security. Now, I can't remember Scotland ever becoming part of the American homeland. But it's time John Swinney started to take direct action on this, because we should not have a boat that is armed to the gunnels in Scottish waters from a country that is threatening to invade one of our allies, and that ally being Greenland. If this had been Russia coming up the Thames, implementing Moscow law in the Thames, it would be seen as an act of war. So why is this action from the United States of America, who are not an ally of our country anymore? They are a rogue terrorist nation being controlled by Netanyahu and Israel, who are undergoing a major genocide at this present time. It's time the international grew a pair of balls and took on the United States of America. Because remember one thing, if America goes into Greenland illegally against NATO, they will be instigating Alt 5 of NATO, where every other nation member of NATO will have to come in. And now making a major mistake, because within 1 hour of that happening, NATO will have prisoners of war mounting up to hundreds of thousands, because every single American troop on NATO soil would have to be arrested, and every piece of their war equipment would have to be confiscated from that nation state. And not only that, NATO countries control an awful lot of American money. NATO bring down the American economy within 10 minutes. Because I'll tell you, the American troops will not be going into any country fighting, putting their lives on the line when they ain't getting paid for it. NATO must start flexing its muscles and telling America very clearly, you're no longer the big boys. And see the person that you think's the Messiah. He ain't the Messiah. He's just a very naughty boy.
Well said, Alan. Excuse me, folks, I've got a terrible cough. Eva, it just makes Scotland seem totally and absolutely emasculated. That, you know, decisions that we're not even got the courtesy of informing us about. Because, I mean, the reality is, if the Russians, because it's a Russian tanker, decided to go and sink their tanker, attack the Russians, attack Wick, for example, the airport that was used to part of this, we've got no say in it. This is why we need to be independent.
This is just one of the many consequences of that no vote in 2014. That's what this is. And John Swinney's got a damn cheek whining about it, because between 2014 and now, he's done absolutely zero to bring about the independence of our country. Now, if you look at the headlines, what the BBC have reported, and, you know, we call them the British Brainwashing Corporation because they are, but what they say is, and listen very carefully, a US Coastguard ship involved in the seizure of a Russian-flagged oil tanker is now berthed in Aberdeen. The ship was boarded south of Iceland last week in an operation supported by British armed forces, and has since been sitting in the Moray Firth with a US Coastguard ship and tugs next to it. The Coastguard vessel was seen in Aberdeen South Harbour on Friday. So that's fact. That it was an illegal operation, an illegal seizure of a Russian-flagged ship by the Americans, assisted by the British, using Scottish air bases and now a Scottish port. This is completely and utterly wrong from a Scottish perspective. Nobody in Scotland asked for this. I doubt very much whether anybody in Scotland supports this, and there's nothing John Swinney can do about it, because, to use the words of his colleague Angus Robertson, Westminster treats the devolved administrations as if they were subordinate. They impose Westminster rule by stealth. They refer to muscular unionism. Well, that's the price of the union. So anybody in the SNP leadership that's complaining about this at the moment has got a bloody brass neck, because they're enabling this kind of thing to continue and to prolong Scotland's agony within the union. As you said, Roddy, this should be a catalyst for a united campaign for independence. So Scotland's position as a subordinate element, as a devolved country, and Holyrood as a devolved parliament or a devolved assembly, is one problem. But another serious issue is that Number 10, and most of the unionist occupants of the House of Commons and also the House of Lords look at the Scottish government and they laugh. They make comments like, John, you should be more worried about the potholes or getting the bins emptied on time, that kind of thing. They laugh at John Swinney because they consider that he's a weak leader. They wouldn't have been laughing if you had a man of the calibre of Alex Salmond standing as a First Minister of Scotland just now, because his reaction would have been a lot stronger, a lot more forceful than that. And where I find myself getting really frightened about this and the implications are that earlier on today I watched a press conference in Copenhagen where American senators who had gone over there to extend the hand of friendship and diplomacy because of what they had heard and Trump had said about their aspirations towards Greenland. Well, it's a terrifying thing to be America's enemy, but as Phil often says, and he quotes others, it's much more frightening when America's pretending to be your friend. So how long is it going to be before Trump's senators are being welcomed into Scotland and they're pretending that they're extending a hand of friendship and diplomacy when they're actually here because they've got their beady eyes on our resources, not just on our oil and our gas, but on our shores and what they can do with Scottish waters, what they can keep in Scottish waters, you know, extending from weapons of mass destruction and nuclear subs to parking their Coastguard ships and God knows what else in our water. And these issues are so serious that John Swinney today should be in touch with the leaders of all the independence parties and independence movements within Scotland and talking about a plebiscite for the Holyrood election in May and get the job done, get our independence and take our own place on the world stage as a peace-loving, peacekeeping nation and kick the US Coast Guard ships and all other American weaponry and warmongers out of our waters and off our soil, unless and until it's what the people of Scotland say that they want, which I very much doubt they ever will.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Swinney is a weak leader, and that video shows just exactly how it is. You know, he's probably written a strongly worded letter. And Starmer's another one who's an absolute weak leader who will allow America to do what it likes. And it wouldn't surprise me, as you've alluded to, Eva, that, you know, if the Americans said, yeah, we've decided we want to look after the Scottish oil and the Scottish natural resources, he would go, okay, and you go, yeah, because he is such a weak individual. But Greg, it's just absolutely demoralising and embarrassing what's happened to us over these couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely is. I mean, what do you say about John Swinney? He's the First Minister. We're expecting a lot stronger words from him, especially we've got a foreign country, America. Yes, they're allies at the present, but they've committed, you know, piracy in the international waters. We've then given their Coastguard vessel, which is a military vessel. It's not a peace vessel like our RNLI or Coastguard. This is a heavily armed ship with cannons and all sorts of stuff. It's then escorted that tanker into one of our own harbours. We've given them safe haven. So you've got to question the thinking behind that from a UK point of view. But John Swinney, I mean, as you said, Roddy, what's he going to do? A strongly worded letter? It's beyond that. If we had Alex Salmond in place, someone of his calibre, the fire coming out of Scotland would be immense. You know, I'm expecting more from our First Minister, but honest to God, John Swinney, he's behaving like a glorified council leader because that's all he is.
Yeah.
Aye, that's all he is. And if he wants to be treated like a leader of a country, he needs to start behaving like a leader of a country. He needs to start behaving as if we are independent. Even if the UK ultimately has control over our harbours and our coastline and all the rest of it and their defence, it doesn't stop him, you know, having a right go at them and saying this is not welcome in Scotland, not in our name. So that's the type of language we're wanting to hear from John Swinney. Not just that he's deeply concerned. I mean, what kind of language is this? We're talking about international piracy and using our harbours as safe havens. It's not on. It's not in my name. It's not in any of your names. It's not in Scotland's name. And that's what we want to hear from John Swinney.
Yeah, and of course, needless to say, I saw an interview with Douglas Ross and another British nationalist who's quite happy. You know, it makes them feel good. They think they're being big tough guys by doing something like this. They would sell out our country, or they sell out our country every bloody day. But that's what we've said here. Is Scotland a colony? Some people deny we're a colony, Alan. But this week, if you wanted further proof, Reform have appointed their new leader in Scotland. And here we have Lord offered, an English lord sent up to take care of the peasants in Jockeyland.
Yeah, well, poor Councillor Kerr, who was so far up Farage's backside from the day he transferred over to the Reform Party over a year ago, thinking he was going to be leading the party, thinking it was a party of democracy. Well, no, it's not a party of democracy because they don't even trust their own Scottish members to elect their own party leader. And only in a colony could that statement be made where people didn't think it was an April Fool joke. Nigel Farage claims to be the party of anti-elitism, and yet he has just appointed a lord of the realm over Scotland. That's like going back to William Wallace days, where they just appointed the lords to look after those rough Scots. They'll do as they're told. Well, no, we're not. So long as there's 100 of us remain alive, we will not be accepting this ever again. Scotland has a chance to throw this party and every other unionist party out of Holyrood in May this year. And that is by voting for the Alliance to Liberate Scotland. Only when we get rid of these unionists and have people in that parliament with a backbone and the bottle to take on the Westminster establishment can Scotland regain its proper sovereignty and an independent Scotland. Because we cannot accept these vermin and ermine coming in here with a possibility of becoming the First Minister of Scotland, because they will be backed by the Labour Party and the Tory Party, because they are all unionist parties, just different colours. We cannot afford to be sleeping at the wheel here. We must have every single Scot. And what is the most annoying thing about this whole problem is it's not the unionists who are going to put him into power. It is the SNP list votes that are going to put UKIP, there's been that many different changes of that name, the Reform Party into Holyrood. If you're not careful how you use your second vote, then that's the kind of people who you're going to get in. We have to go into the Holyrood elections, not just voting with our hearts, but voting with our head. We have to make sure we play the system that they have been playing since 1999 against them. This system was built to stop independence. We can change the rules if we start playing by our rules and not theirs. And that is by voting for an independent candidate on the constituency and an independent coalition on the list. We will wipe out the unionists. Yeah, we may take out some SNP as well. But as I said, unionists will be gone because there are as many unionists within the SNP, and it's time to waken up to that fact if you want a free Scotland.
Absolutely, 100%. I don't know if you saw either the press conference with Offord and Farage, or Farage as we prefer to call him on this show. But he was asked the question, of course, he got the constitutional question, and in typical arrogant Anglo superiority, he came out with, well, it was once in a generation, it was a once in a generation thing, and that's been settled and we don't need it. The people of Scotland don't want it, I've decided, sort of thing. They're not democratic. They're supposed to be the party of the people. They're not. They're an extreme right-wing English unionist party.
Exactly, but what else did you expect from the guy that was one of the directors of the Vote No Borders campaign in 2014? Died in the wool unionist. Some people say he's a spook. I don't know about that. I just thought that spooks were better looking, more attractive, and likely to be a bit more Scottish than he's ever appeared to me to be. His heart lies very much in Westminster, albeit that he would claim to be a Scot. It's a concern for me, though, that we're having to talk about members of the House of Lords having any role to play in Scottish democracy at all, though. And a greater concern actually is the number of times that you hear the SNP in Westminster talking about the Lords. The other day, they were talking about lodging a bill to try to strip Peter Mandelson and others from their titles, when what we should be doing is having that united campaign to remove ourselves out of the union so that whatever happens in the House of Lords has got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Scotland anymore. That's what we need to do. That's where all our attention should be directed. But as Alan said, we need to remind people that what will let reform in is what let all the unionists in on the list in 2021. Because if people had taken Alex Salmond's advice and Alba's advice at that time, they would have voted in their great numbers, SNP in the constituency, Alba on the list. There would have been a supermajority for independence 5 years ago. The independence settlement would have been negotiated and implemented. We would not be worrying about American Coastguard ships in our waters. We would not be concerning ourselves with contributing to illegal wars. We would not be passing budgets in the Scottish Parliament that were so very restricted that even the income tax rates more or less stayed the same for people in the lower brackets. We would not be crowing about things that ought to have been done years ago and they're just getting round to them now, such as free school dinners in all primary schools or the like. So people need to think carefully this time when they cast their vote and not be duped by both votes SNP, because that won't work. All that will do is keep more SNP seats on bums on seats rather, and elect the unionists that we don't want to be there. Now, in that regard, remember, support for the SNP is running at about 20% lower than support for independence. So there is a sizable number of independent supporters who are not going to vote SNP, and bear that in mind when you're analysing any opinion polls. But to get back to the point in terms of democracy, no, Scotland is not currently a democracy, and all the evidence that you need is right there, that what is threatening to be perhaps the second or third biggest party in the country is led by somebody who was not elected by members and who sits in the House of Lords, having previously failed to become a legislator because he stood and failed to be elected as an MSP, and his reward from the Tory party, whom he's now deserted, was to elevate him to the House of Lords, where he could be a legislator as the result of privilege and enjoy pomp and ceremony and a shed load of money for doing nothing other than sooking into the right people at the right time. And he's now obviously decided to transfer his allegiance to Reform and Nigel Farage because he sees the writing on the wall.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, Greg. We know that since 1955, the Scots on any level, local, regional, Holyrood, Westminster, Europe, do not elect Tories. You know, the Tories have never won an election. These are Tories. I mean, let's just look at some of the lists. Some of them, just some of them. There we go. Every one of them, ex-Tories. Ex-Tories. And Zawahi, that guy there, apparently he asked for a peerage, and they said, well, the Tories said, no, we can't give you one. You're, I'm afraid, a wee bit poison. That's why he left and went to Farage and the Reform Party. But these are just Tories by another name.
Yeah, they are, Roddy. Without a doubt. I mean, it's just a rebranding, as the picture there showed. And Scotland doesn't vote Tory. We haven't voted Tory since 1955, as you said. We're socially leaning on the left scale. That's where Scotland is. We don't vote for right-wing parties. And the SNP 1 and 2 plan will, inevitably let these people in on the list seats. You could call it letting them in the back door if you want, but it's certainly letting them in. So our plan for an alliance to liberate Scotland, that's got to be the plan. Vote for us on both seats, but certainly the list seats certainly important as well. The other thing, as Eva mentioned, is the 20%, the approximately 20% of people who are absolutely scunnered with the SNP. They don't know where to put their vote, and there's a chance that a lot of these people will potentially not even vote in the election, which will be disastrous. We need to rally the troops. So we're putting the message out to the 20% from the Alliance to Liberate. Listen, we know you're scunnered. We're scunnered. That's why we're standing as the Alliance to Liberate Scotland. So gift us your vote. You've got nothing else to lose. That's another way to look at it. Throw your vote our way. Take a chance on us. We're a new party. We're up and coming. Throw your vote our way. Let's see what we can do if we can get into that parliament and shape the future and shape the desire for independence. Because SNP 1 and 2, it's a failed plan. Totally failed plan. Everybody knows it. I believe that a lot of the SNP members and supporters know that as well. But the party's headstrong. The party's voted down any of the dissension at the recent last year's conference. So the party's gone headstrong into SNP 1 and 2, but it's going to potentially lead to Reform coming in through the back door. And John Swinney keeps saying, vote for us to stop Reform. It's voting exactly for SNP 1 and 2 that's going to bring Reform in, because Reform is basically an alliance of the Westminster parties. It's pro-Tory, but all the other parties who are failing, Scottish Labour, Scottish Liberal, I hate even using the word Scottish because there are no Scottish parties. There should be an investigation into that as well, how these parties are even allowed to stand under that headline of Scottish. You've got to be very careful how you stand in an election. They've been standing for the past quarter century as Scottish parties. Well, they're all registered in London. They're all branches of the big parties in London. So some question marks there. But definitely, if Reform come in, it'll be disastrous for us. And I think that if SNP 1 and 2, if that's the plan, well, people need to really, have a good look at themselves. But as I said, especially the 20%, the people that are scunnered, that's who we are really aiming for. We keep getting called splitters, that we're splitting the vote. We're no splitting the vote. SNP 1 and 2 is causing the division here, and the people that can see through it are people like us. That's why we're standing. I don't think any of us would rather be standing. I don't think we would be standing if the SNP would just grow a set and say, this election coming up is a plebiscite election for independence. We're going to unite everybody around about us, and we're going for it. See, at that point, they'd get absolute support from everybody. But as it is, they're not doing that. So that's why the Alliance to Liberate Scotland is here. That's what we stand for. Independence, nothing less. And if we get into Parliament, we'll be pushing for it every single day that we're in there to end that Parliament, and as soon as physically possible, to bring about independence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about them being allowed to say Scottish Tories, Scottish Labour. We know from bitter experience how pernickety the Electoral Commission can be about names. We know, except when it comes to the British parties, and they allow this. I mean, if it was in commercial terms in a business, they would be done for fraud, trading under a fraudulent name. But that's another story and a programme all on its own. Absolutely. But Ian, who's Ian? I don't know. Alan, the union has never, ever been weaker. It's its weakest point it's ever been. Now, if we've discussed this a few times, where people were like, Tories were sick of the Tories. Right, well, let's go to Labour. And they went to Labour, and they very quickly saw, oh, no, wait a minute, they're useless. And they've now jumped into the Farage, hoping that this is the ones, the magic bullet that will get them out of trouble. But what's actually happened down south? Some opinion polls out this week. And here's one. The Labour Party are down to 10%. The Tories are around about 12%. Farage is going to get a huge majority. Actually, the Labour Party will have less seats throughout the UK than the SNP will have just out of Scotland. I put the caveat in that this is just an opinion poll, but that's how I've never in my life have I seen the Labour Party down at 10% and the Tories down at 12%. The union is weak at the moment. This is our time to strike.
It certainly is, and it's the usual kind of fascist campaign where they've brought in fear of immigrants, where they keep pushing the immigrant situation, and Labour are now trying to match reform that they're losing their grassroots and their supporters going right down. But even in Scotland during Thatcher times, Tories had no MPs in Scotland at all. They still had more than 10% of the vote. Yet, without having any MPs in Scotland, they still ruled over Scotland from Westminster, because England is the ones who decide. Yeah, we get a vote. It's not democratic, because England decides who governs over us, even although we have a Scottish Parliament, because England are the ones that have the full economic powers. They decide how much pocket money we are getting. Now, that is the biggest problem. But just getting rid of unionists from Holyrood won't be enough, because you could have every single unionist out of Holyrood. But if you have SNP members of the Scottish Parliament sitting in Holyrood who are not interested in independence, then you will not be getting independence. That's why even voting SNP on the constituency is a dangerous act. Now, to take people back to 1918 in Ireland, where they had the Parliamentary Irish Party, who were another fake independence party. The people of Ireland won that party and decided Sinn Féin, their faith into Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin won that election by a landslide. They came from no place. They were, as the establishment would say, an irrelevance. Well, they showed that they weren't an irrelevance. They came from no place and kicked the fake independence party and took the power. And what happened 3 years later? And it's funny enough that this week, on the 16th of January 2022, Michael Collins marched to Dublin Castle and had the handover from the British imperial state, removing the British from Ireland. And the December that year, Ireland became officially an independent nation. That was 3 years after the people of Ireland kicked out the fake Party of Independence and replaced them with one with a bottle and a backbone to take the movement forward. Scotland must learn the lessons from their colleagues. Getting rid of the unionists aren't enough. We have to take total control. And that is why we are putting our heads above the party in the alliance to Scotland. Now, there are people who are saying, but no political party would ever ask voters to vote for another political party. Well, ISP are, Sovereignty are. There are two political parties within the independence movement that are putting before party. They have joined forces with the Independents for Independence. And we are all going as one on the list to make sure Scotland's voice is heard loud and clear. And make no mistake, if we win a majority in Holyrood, we will not be saying, please, Mr. Starmer, can we have an appointment to discuss things about Scottish independence? We will be going into that parliament and we will be saying, the people of Scotland have made their democratic decision and they have proven the sovereign will of the Scottish people are for independence, and we are now declaring independent Scotland here and now. You either get around the negotiating table or you remove yourself from our country because you are no longer wanted. But as of this day onwards, this parliament will be acting as an independent parliament. The ball is now in your court.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. But that's, as I say, the union's never been weaker, Eva. We've got the Reform who are just absolute carpetbaggers. Here's one of the classic examples, and there's a wee cracking story behind it, is Robert Jenrick. Now, he was getting ready to do a big smashing withdrawal, but his leader, Badenoch, found out and sacked him, then he went across. And he was, now, firstly, let me tell you this, he was the Minister for Immigration. And he turned around and said his reason for leaving the Conservative Party and going to Reform was because he didn't trust the Tory Party on immigration. He was the minister, for goodness sake. Carpetbaggers, that's all they are.
Yeah, they're just rats in a sack, aren't they? They're all in it for themselves and for, their own careers and their own opportunities. And again, like Malcolm offered, he saw the writing on the wall. The Tories know that their ship's sunk, so they're jumping onto the lifeboat that they think Reform provides to them. And that's not about the betterment of the lives of the people of the United Kingdom. That's just for their own self-interest, as usual. But in terms of the Westminster being at its weakest, Roddy, I thought you had information there about the statistics in Wales, or perhaps also in Northern Ireland.
That's coming up.
So am I allowed to talk about that just now?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. It was the next question anyway, but on you go. I'll get it up for you there.
You'll see there that it's suggested that Plaid Cymru are well in the lead at 37%. Labour plummeted to 10%. That's unheard of in Wales.
Oh, for sure.
It would mean that they ended up with probably no seats in Wales at all, which is, what a turn up for the books that would be. The interesting thing, obviously, is the desire within the Welsh people for independence being restored to Wales is clearly on the up and up. There are other independence supporting parties in Wales, and there are independents in Wales too. So you probably find that the actual support for independence in Wales is higher than the 37% voting intention for the Senate for Plaid Cymru. It's probably at least in the low 40%. And you'll see that the numbers on the Plaid Cymru marches and the Yes Wales marches have also been increasing over the piece. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there this year. Similar position in Northern Ireland, where the desire for a unity poll is increasing. It may well be the case if the Scottish Government or the SNP don't get the finger out with a united campaign in Scotland for the Holyrood election, that you'll see Ireland will be having a unity or a border poll before Scotland actually has a plebiscite, let alone another referendum, which we know is not going to be happening. So given that Westminster is probably at its weakest for generations, if not ever, Now is the time to strike. Now is the time not simply to talk to allies in other constituent parts of the United Kingdom about a strategy to attack and destroy the union, because that's what we're all about. It's also time to speak to other independentistas. Now, yes, United are having meetings in February and March. Obviously, Liberate Scotland have got our fundraiser at the beginning of February in Perth for a Burns event, which will be all about Burns, but particularly about independence and the unity of the movement. Other organisations are doing their bit too, but crucially, the only people that are talking loudly and clearly about an electoral event that can be a plebiscite are ourselves in Liberate Scotland and the others that are with us. And obviously, Kenny McCaskill talks about the list vote and how it can be used too. The SNP are not talking about a plebiscite, except for the rebels within the SNP who moved unsuccessfully their amendment at the conference last year. So I really hope that the rebels' numbers within the SNP are swelling, and that they can bring that party leadership round to understanding and publicly acknowledging what the rest of us know, which is that to break down the union, the independence movement have got to be better together and stronger for Scotland and be a united movement. And that way we liberate Scotland. But if the SNP do not participate in turning Holyrood 26 into a plebiscite, then we will be taking them on at every election from now until Scotland is an independent country once more, because that will be the only way that independence will be delivered. It might be despite the SNP as opposed to via the SNP. And if that's what it has to be, that's the choice of the SNP leadership. It wouldn't be the choice of the Scottish people.
Yeah, here's the other thing, Greg. If you actually notice it, 37% for Plaid, that's higher than the SNP in Scotland. The SNP don't, they're somewhere between 30, 35 on a good day. But Plaid is polling better than them.
Yeah,
that should be a wake-up call to the Labour Party, to the SNP.
Absolutely, Roddy. I mean, it's fantastic for Wales. I mean, Plaid have always struggled, I've noticed over the years, but this is a breakthrough for them. What I did notice on the graph there that you showed was you could have easily, know the exact figures, know the exact percentages, but you could have easily transferred that to Scotland. It's a pretty similar setup to what's happening in Scotland. Liberal Democrats, Labour, Tories, they're totally irrelevant, absolutely irrelevant. The Green Party are still there, but they're not to be trusted because they said independence, wasn't a red line issue. So that's they're bombed out the water for me. And then Reform, well, we've spoke about Reform, and they'll only get in through this crazy SNP 1 and 2 plan. That's the only reason that they're getting in, and it's because all the unionists are all banding together, specifically the Tories, into this new party, rebranding themselves. Think back, 2014, we gave the UK establishment the biggest fright of their lives. They didn't expect us to get as close, right? And we all know that it wasn't a democratic event in the way that we would have expected. That there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. But put that aside, we still gave them the fright of their lives. 2015, we gave them another fright. 56 out of the 59 possible MPs went to Westminster. We met the Thatcher Doctrine at that point to up sticks and leave and declare independence. The SNP didn't do it. Then Brexit came round. The SNP, in their wisdom, decided to try and challenge it. Well, whether they liked it or not, we're in the system we're in, and that was a democratic vote, and the English people voted for Brexit. We were pulled along kicking and screaming because we voted against it. What we should have done at Brexit was use that to say, here's another big example of where we've got absolutely no control over our own destiny. Yep. Hence why we're saying we're a colony. You then come along to now, with all the international events that's happening, everything that's going wrong, the rise of Reform, all the rest of it, the anti-immigration stuff, plethora of stuff that we don't support in Scotland. And all we need to do is declare that in May it's a plebiscite for independence, and if we vote independent supporting parties in, and they win a majority as an alliance, as a coalition, call it whatever you want, but if the independence movement gets into Parliament, that's a democratic event in anybody's eyes. That's a democratic event in the international community's eyes. Nobody can stand against it other than Westminster, who will, inevitably stand against it. We know they will, but that's to be expected. So as you said, they can come in and negotiate with us, or they can get the hell out of the country, because we're voting for independence. And as Eva said there, if it doesn't work and we're stuck for another 5 years of devolution, well, we'll be the thorn in their side, because we'll be constantly reminding them where they erred and what they should be doing for our people. So
Absolutely.
they need to vote. People need to vote for independence and vote for the Alliance to Liberate Scotland.
Absolutely. I mean, you said, we beat the threshold of the Thatcher doctrine. Unfortunately, we had the Sturgeon doctrine. But that was the problem we had there. But here's on the polling in Scotland. Very interesting, actually, to see exactly where we are, Alan. And the SNP are going to be short of the big majority. So, John gets off quite easy. Oh, I've put the wrong one up. I beg your pardon, folks. I've put the wrong one up. But the polling for Holyrood is quite interesting. If you just bear with me for a second. Where are we? I've got it here somewhere. The old eyes on. Here we go. There's one below. The Holyrood, they're only going to get they're going to get 61 seats if you have to believe the polls as they are just now. They will still be short of the trigger, for him to go and ask for his Section 30. I bet he's glad. There'll be two, because even he didn't include the Greens in his plan because he didn't want the majority. That's what I believe.
Well, as Baldrick used to say, I have a cunning plan, because that was John's plan all along. He knew that the SNP cannot get an overall majority. Everybody knows, even those diehard SNP who still go around saying, but we need the overall majority. You know deep in your heart that that is not possible, and that is being used as an excuse so you do not have to declare independence or even go cap in hand asking for a referendum, because no referendum will ever be given. No. I mean, Greg mentioned 2014. We got that referendum not because the SNP had a majority. We got that referendum because the English establishment thought it would bury the SNP and the independence movement once and for all. They were in for a big shock, and they got a big shock. That will never be repeated through permission from Westminster. And we do not need permission through Westminster. No other nation in the history of the United Kingdom who has gained their independence has spoken to Westminster pleading with them to get their independence. They have all taken it. Independence will always be refused by your colonial masters, and that is why we cannot rely on them to gain us independence. But we have to all unite within this camp. I said it before. You've got to vote with your heart and mind. Put your loyalties to the side, because this country is far more important than any political party. The way this is run and who runs this country has a lot of impact on our children and our grandchildren. Do you want them to be brought up and living under the English boot, the way we were brought up? Now, people could say all the like, but you've got your Scottish Parliament. They have authority over health. They have authority over education. They have authority. Well, we don't. Because authority and power is all about money. And while our money is being siphoned off down to England to subsidise their facilities and their policies and their services, we do not have total control, because we need the money to make the changes that is needed. And we also have the authority to remove the English service who are the advice to our Scottish ministers based on their Westminster masters, because that is what's happening now. We have English civil servants telling Scottish politicians what to do. Only independence can change that. And only through the ballot box can we gain that independence. Now, there are some people saying we shouldn't be voting at all. Voting, that's not voting at all, isn't protest. Raising the white flag and accepting English rule over our nation. Now, I run a campaign at the Westminster election, the Not My Parliament campaign to spoil ballot papers. That is only effective at the Westminster election because there is no way any Scottish MPs are going to be getting control over that Parliament. The Scottish Parliament, however, we can take control. We can take total control, and we can start running that Parliament as an independent Parliament. Now, I mentioned Ireland in 1918. They brought all their MPs back home and set up their own Parliament. All we have to do is bring our MPs back home, or because they're unionists, we just ignore them totally. We'll bring all our pro-independence parties back home, and we run the Scottish Parliament as an independent Parliament. And we force Westminster to hit us with Section 35 time and time again, and we turn round to the United Nations and say, now, do you believe that we're a colony? We cannot improve the lives of our people because these scumbags down here want us to live under their boot. Well, it's no happening anymore. Scots must grow a backbone. We must stop listening to the SNP bullshit. We have to move forward as a country, as one. And we have to put people into power who could actually use that power for the benefit of the people, not themselves.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, Eva, because one thing I've noticed with all the people from Alliance to Liberate Scotland, not one of them has been a careerist. Not one of them has worked for an MSP or been an intern, is actually looking for a career. Most of them are quite reluctant because they do believe in the one thing. I think it's fair to say if the Reform are the hardcore unionists, the Alliance to Liberate Scotland are the hardcore independentistas. It's not about personal gain. It's not about getting a career. It's not about getting a pension. It's not about being able to stand up in Holyrood and talk a load of mince. It's about one thing and one thing only. There's no careerists, and they have this burning ambition for one thing only, independence, nothing less.
Well, burning ambition for independence, and some of us have held it for our entire lives. And I'm not giving up the ghost now. I've got a career. I'm not needing to be an MSP. And I'm, unlike very many people in Scotland, I'm very grateful that financially I don't really have anything much to worry about. So I'm not there for the money. What I want to see is Scotland independent, not simply because we used to be an independent country, not simply because we are a nation, not simply because we're a country, not a county, but because it is only with the powers of self-determination that we will be able to create the Scotland that the country should be and create the lives that the people of Scotland deserve to have, using our own resources for our own good and taking our place, as I said earlier, as a peaceable, peace-loving nation that fosters diplomacy and fosters peace and not warmongering. But you needed no greater example of the reasons why we need independence desperately than you did a few days ago when the Scottish budget was revealed and debated. And it was very small pickings across the board, simply and solely because it's a restricted budget from a devolved parliament. That's it, in a nutshell. And whatever it is that the Scottish Government suggests by way of budgetary measures, the Unionists will always be able to pick holes in because there will never be enough money to go around when somebody else controls the purse strings.
Correct.
So if you think about when Scotland is independent, it will become independent because of A, a united campaign by determined independentistas, B, when there is elected a majority of MPs, or in this case for Holyrood, MSPs. So a majority of independent supporting MSPs is necessary. It doesn't have to be from the one party because we know that that's basically now impossible, but a majority of MSPs for independence and a majority of the popular vote, so that these two aspects would give those elected to Holyrood international legitimacy, and you can go to the United Nations or to any international organisation or any other country on the planet and say to them, we had a democratic election and everybody that voted for us knew they were voting for independence, nothing less. It would not be like the times when Nicola Sturgeon, for example, said a vote for the SNP is not a vote for independence. We're very clear that every vote for every independent supporting party and candidate this year should be a vote for independence, nothing less, independence, nothing else. And when we've got that mandate, we're entitled to say to Westminster and to the world, the people of Scotland have spoken, and they've spoken loudly, clearly, firmly, and in the sure and certain knowledge that these votes will comprise the majority that delivers independence. Then we roll up the sleeves, and then we start building the country. We eradicate the homeless figures within a very short space of time. 35,000 households in Scotland are currently homeless, or 35,000 people, 17,000 households. Drugs deaths, difficulties in the NHS, education, roads, bridges, ferries, all of that stuff we're able to tackle because we will control our own income and we will control our own expenditure in a fashion we can never do when Westminster's in charge of weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde. Westminster is bleeding dry, our gas and our oil, our wind and our wave resources. Westminster's gathering the revenue from whisky or from tourism. We don't even yet have a ferry terminal that takes us to Europe so that we can trade directly with Europe. We can visit them, they can visit us. We've got to go via England at the moment. These are all areas that we can target, and Scotland will begin to soar. And, we would leave the rest of the UK behind in economic terms. And that's why they're holding on to us. That's why you've got the reintroduction of muscular unionism. It's why you've got shenanigans like Malcolm Offord joining the Reform Party. It's because by no stretch of the imagination can any unionist actually accept, understand and acknowledge that England cannot survive without Scotland comprising its source of revenue.
100%, 100%. They don't hang on to us for our charm, that's for sure, or our love of them or their football team or cricket team, that's for sure. But the thing about this vote of reform in Scotland, and also similarly in Wales, Greg, is this: they're not taking votes, or very few votes, from SNP voters. It's unionist votes that are shuffling about. That's why they're down at 10 and 12%. Those votes are now going to reform, because that's the bulwark to keep England in control. So, they know that you need more than one party to get the victory. It's time that the SNP acknowledge that.
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. It's a Trojan horse set up, and all these parties that are now failing are all just uniting under reform, because as you said, Roddy, they've got to have this singular party. They've got to unite behind a singular party that stands for something. They stand for keeping the United Kingdom intact. We all stand for independence for Scotland, seceding from the Union, ending the Union, whatever. But the problem is, our independence movement at the moment is fragmented because the leading party, the SNP, traditionally the leading party, are not taking, not grasping the nettle here, and they're not uniting all the parties. Now, a lot of people are accusing us and on other independence parties of doing the same and not uniting. No, that's completely false. We've made it crystal clear. Unite with us, join with the Alliance to Liberate Scotland, or at the very, very least, just align your policies with us. And the policy is simple. We want independence as soon as feasibly possible, and this could be the democratic event. I mean, John Swinney must be reading out of the Penguin book of how to keep the Union intact, because he's doing everything possible to keep the Union intact. I mean, it's so simple. Declare that this election coming would be a plebiscite for independence. If we fail on it, we fail on it, but at least we've declared where we stand. At least we've tried. He's not even trying, and you've got to question that. The people have got to question that. And as I said, for anybody saying that the other parties are splitting, we're not splitting. It's the SNP's headstrong attitude of SNP 1 and 2 that's driving people away from voting for SNP. Hence why you've got this approximate 20% of the overall independence support who are refusing to vote for the SNP. So what do we do at that point? Do we just say, to hang with it, just let them no vote, just let this 20% sit there and no turn out in the day? No, we're saying, we're giving you an option, we're giving you a viable option. Alliance to Liberate Scotland, we are the option. Give us your votes, because we'll be in that parliament kicking them up the arse, to move this thing forward.
Absolutely, 100%. But if you actually look at some of the rhetoric going about just now, Alan, the Labour Party, for example, are saying, vote Labour. We're the only people that can stop the SNP. No, We're the only people that can make your lives better. We're the only people who can, make something better in Scotland. It's about stop the SNP. Reform are doing the exact bloody same. But they're also doing it with lies, as always with lies. And I'd like to see this wee video. We know this week that Sarwar's party put out an absolute fabrication, a lie about the NHS.
I don't think today is the day for Mr Sarwar to be in a strong position to accuse me of talking rubbish. Absolutely. Because this morning, a campaigner, a health campaigner, has raised the fact publicly that she has requested from Mr Sarwar a formal apology after a campaign leaflet, which I have in front of me, was posted to thousands and thousands of homes around the country with a false quotation in support of his party in the leaflet. And the campaigner who was falsely quoted asked a fair question. If they've written that out of nowhere, what else have they lied about? So I don't think Mr Sarwar is in a position to say to me anything about the budget, because not only has he misled the public in a campaign leaflet which a member of the public has called out, Mr Sarwar is wrestling with reform to try to get into second place in the opinion polls this morning. Mr Sarwar knows that it's all over, it's finished, the dream is gone, he's in opposition and we're going to stay in government.
We're the first, I am the first one to attack Mr Swinney when he doesn't do things right. He's right in this one. This is just typical of the Labour Party. They've done it for years, lied in leaflets, lied about things, invented people, an ordinary constituent, it turns out, is a Labour Party candidate or whatever. This dishonesty, if they lie about their name, we mentioned that earlier, they'll lie about their name, they'll lie about these things in leaflets. What won't they lie about?
Well, there's an old saying in politics in Scotland. How do you know Sarwar's telling a lie? He opens his mouth. Because every time he opens his mouth, another lie comes out. They continuously call themselves Labour and that he is the leader of their party. Well, no. I say to people, go into their website. They have got a list of every single legally registered political party. You have the Labour Party, registered in England, and their leader is Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who is supporting genocide, who is bringing in laws to arrest and lock people up for holding placards, and he is attacking disabled. Now, the Labour Party, on this occasion, it wasn't just the fact that he told lies. The woman that he said quotes was a national campaigner for maternity rights. This woman was so adamant that she has to be neutral. Everybody else who is campaigning on a national strategy, you have to be independent of any political party because you need cross-party support to get your policies through. Sarwar, the benefit of the Scottish Labour, put that entire campaign in major jeopardy, just for his own personal gain. But why is he trying to make political point scoring on total lies in the NHS? He could quite easily have got many issues within the NHS. Let's take child mental health. A 3-year waiting list for a child to be seen at CAMHS. That could be solved with political will. Having 6 months and 1 yearly assessments of people who have already been assessed going through the local community health centres. Because all that means is taking pressure, taking your weight, and asking you a few questions. That doesn't need a professional mental health person to do. That would then allow them to go on and deal with the first-time assessments and bring that waiting list down drastically. That means people would have access to the benefits they're entitled to. Because a 3-year wait for getting an assessment for CAMHS could cost a family up to £30 on benefits. That is unacceptable because at this present time are struggling to homes and feed their kids. That has to be changed. The other one of children who are moving from child services to adult services. Absolutely, if they've got extraordinary medical needs, there is no for them at adult level. So Sarwar could quite easily have been coming in and joining in with our campaign, my campaign, of a stage, not age, health and social care policy, which the SNP promised me they would look at. They sent me a report that they had mentioned over a year ago that didn't mention extreme clinical needs. So they trusted. But there's a lot of things that can be done. You could criticise the SNP for doing things, but also come up with alternatives that are required to be done, that are very cheap to be done, and will benefit the people of Scotland. Sarwar doesn't do that. He just criticises and criticises, and lie after lie after lie. So I would advise people that if Sarwar says anything to you, just don't believe him. If he says the sky is blue, go and check, because every single word that comes out his mouth is a lie. All he wants to be is the First Minister of Scotland on the leash of Keir Starmer. It is not in the interest of Scotland, and he has to be removed. We cannot afford to go any further than this election for independence, because the polls have already shown it is looking like Reform will form the government in 2028-29. And if that happens, and Swinney thinks he's going down there to ask for a referendum, no, because what he'll be getting told is no, and you're no longer First Minister, because see that we pretended Parliament, we are removing it. You're now coming under full control of the Westminster Parliament again, because that is what's going to happen if Reform get in Westminster. So this nonsense about, and every other group that's saying this, wait to 2028-29. No, by that time, we have lost. We will never get our independence. This is the election that we must win. This isn't just about, let's try, because we always have another shot. No, this is our election. We either get independence now or start going home and shining polishing that chain of Westminster, because it's going to be around your neck for a long, long time.
Indeed it is. But this is it must be terrible being a unionist, a Scottish unionist, because you've got to demean your country every day. You've got to talk your country down every day. You've got to lie every day to keep your country under the yoke of another country. And I mean, we know that your man has got absolute, a charge sheet as long as your arm. Just a few of them, Eva. This is one of my favourites.
No austerity under Labour.
Austerity. Read my lips, Eva. He's a lying sack of you know what.
The thing, though, is in reality, Labour are becoming an irrelevance. We see that in Wales and we see it in Scotland. They're not going to win the seats that they think that they will win, but they'll put a dent in some here and there. I mean, you see the numbers for Westminster, and that will be replicated at Holyrood and at the Senate. But you see, what really annoys me here, incredibly so, to the extent where I'm just about swearing with rage, is that you've got John Swinney accusing, quite correctly, Anna Sarwar of lies and misrepresentations in that leaflet. But what is John Swinney doing other than hiding the truth and misrepresenting the position in the context of a number of different areas? One is relative to the Information Commissioner, who has required once more that there be information provided held by the Scottish Government relative to the inquiry regarding Sturgeon and Alex Salmond. And the Scottish Government, yet again, are dragging their heels, and they've missed a deadline, and they might end up in court again, and they might face contempt of court proceedings. So there's an immediate difficulty for John, because we know that he was the holder of the redacting pen in the context of the information which has not been disclosed. So great big issue for him there. And in essence, he's defending his own actions, which is again quite wrong. So that's a problem for him. Major problem for him is that he persistently claims that the Scottish Government is upholding the decision of the Supreme Court relative to sex, meaning biological sex, and women's right to single-sex spaces. But he speaks with forked tongue, because while he's saying that publicly on the one hand, On the other, the Scottish Government are actively pursuing a declaration of non-compatibility so that they can maintain trans-identifying men in women's prisons. Now, I said last week that are men serving their sentences in women's prisons in Scotland, and during the week in the Scottish Parliament, 3 of those men were named. They're all violent offenders currently housed in female prisons in Scotland. So John Swinney has no right to claim the moral high ground over Anna Sarwar or any other politician who makes it up, because John Swinney is very carefully, day in and day out, making it up, dodging the issue, manipulating information and refusing to be honest and upfront with the people of Scotland. They've had to have it dragged out of them. And that is a stain on our democracy, and it's also a stain on the independence movement, because remember, the SNP's line was that Holyrood was going to be transparent and open and honest in a people's parliament, and it was bringing power nearer to the people, closer to home. The physiology, if they were closer to home, you could people them with stains if they didn't do what they were told. Well, that's exactly where we are. There are very, very, very few people in Scotland that believe that men should have access to women's single-sex spaces. And yet that is something that has driven a coach and horses through the independence movement. It's one of the biggest reasons why very many of us are no longer in the SNP and can't support them and are not likely to be voting for them when they continue to take that line. So it's time that John Swinney looked in the mirror, looked in his heart, and looked inside his own head to decide what his priorities are, because for the time being, it doesn't look like his priorities are open, honest, transparent government. And people remember that on the doorsteps and in the polling booth. They'll be looking at ballot papers and they'll be choosing between the SNP and Alliance to Liberate Scotland. Well, what they've got is a guarantee from Alliance to Liberate Scotland is independence, nothing less, honest, transparent, talks about what the people of Scotland desire, value and need, not the other stuff that should have been packed and resolved long ago.
Well said, Eva. But as you alluded to earlier, Greg, they lie about their party name, they lie about NHS campaigners, they lie about genocide, say it doesn't exist. They're silent on piracy in the high seas. Starmer hasn't even condemned the killing of that woman in America that was shot by the ICE people. So if they're willing to lie or ignore all these things, what else are they willing to lie and ignore about?
Well, your mind boggles, because they lie about everything, basically. They've basically sold their principles. Labour Party is no Labour anymore. It hasn't been for the last quarter of a century. When you think back, and the Labour were strong, especially in Scotland, since the Second World War, right through the late 90s into the very early 2000s. How the mighty have fallen, and how they've fallen is because they sold their principles. They're no Labour any longer. They don't support the traditional Labour values. I mean, see when you cut the knees off the industrial base that supports you, your workers, when you shut down Grangemouth and Mossmorn, and you shut down all the industries, and you stand by and you wring your hands and you allow Westminster to shut all these industries down, you do nothing about it, no matter what party's in Westminster. And when you do that, and all the kind of social clubs, the working men and women's clubs, all the fabric that gelled all the working party, the working class together, when that's all taken away, Labour have only got themselves to blame for the situation they find themselves in, and now sitting at 10% in the Scottish Parliament. Hell mend them, they're totally irrelevant. Them, Liberal Democrats, Tories, absolutely irrelevant, and hence this is the reason for the rise of reform. Because as we've all said, that they're seeing where their bread's buttered, and they're saying we need to go into this new party and pretend this is a new upcoming party with new ideas, when it's just all the same crap regurgitated. So we are risking, as Alan says, we're risking that if we don't, take this next democratic event as being the event to really go for independence, we're risking waiting for 2028, 29 for the next UK general election. By that point, we'll be stripped bare, potentially. You don't know what could happen internationally and all the rest of it that's going on in the world. But certainly, by the time the next general election comes round, And if the polling's correct and reform get into Westminster, it's game over. It's game over for the UK, for the population of the working class in the UK anyway, but it's certainly game over for us in Scotland, especially with this Mickey Mouse Parliament. For it's a Mickey Mouse Parliament, at least we've still got a semblance of democracy, but that will be shut down. Where do we go from that point forward? What does the independence movement do at that point? We can have as many rallies and we can march up and down as many streets as we want. We have as many flags and blow as many whistles. They're not going to listen to us. We won't have a footing. We won't have any say on anything. At least now we can use that Parliament as our democratic event to show the world and show the international community, the international courts, any friendly countries, we're demanding independence. We're a sovereign nation. We're sovereign people. And we've just done a democratic event and we've proved it. That's what has to happen in May.
Here, well said. Time is beaten us as always, ladies and gentlemen, and there's other things I wanted to discuss. One, the BBC having to admit they were lying as well. That what's her name? Kusenberg was lying about the budget. All sorts of things I wanted to Trump blocking. The good thing is he's blocked all the opponents of ours in the World Cup, so there'll be no Brazilian fans, no Haitian fans, and no Moroccan fans. So it's tipped in our favour. So he's not all bad then, eh? But I should just say here now, I was planning to go. I was in the European Championships, as you know. My family are big Tartan Army people. We're not going. I just couldn't go to that country to follow that. I just won't go. It's against everything I believe in. So anyway, that's our podcast for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. And until we see you again, may you and yours please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.